People who left someone at the altar. What made you do it, and what was the fallout? I was a guest on the bride's side. An acquaintance from a previous job that was kind enough to invite me. Everything was going well. She started walking down the aisle, then stopped halfway. Her father and mother came over. She whispered to them, then they all turned around and walked away. The groom immediately followed. Music kept playing, then slowly drifted away. We all just sat there in dead silence. A couple of minutes later, the father of the bride came back down the aisle and apologized, but there was going to be no wedding today. We all just got up and slowly left. There were a couple of angry family members on the groom's side, but once they talked to the father of the bride, they immediately just left. At the door, the mother of the bride shook my hand and thanked us for coming. Told us that they would explain everything later, but for now we should just head home. The story is that the groom the night before ceremony confessed to the bride that he was gay. He loved her. He still wanted to marry her, provide and raise children. But he needed her to know she couldn't let him live like that, and it wasn't fair to either of them. My mom called off a wedding to a man she was engaged to before she met my dad. It was only 1 week before. She said they got into an argument over something very trivial, something having to do with cows. But it was enough of a wake-up call for her that they were not right for each other. I know this man, and she was right not to marry him. There were people that did not get word the wedding was cancelled and showed up at the church. My wife was set to be a bridesmaid in this wedding of her college friend. It was an out-of-state wedding, and they had people coming in from all over the USA and Europe for this expensive sort of deal. Just my wife's dress was over $1,000 easy. 5 days before the wedding, the groom called the whole entire thing off. The reason? He was Church of Christ and she was a Baptist, and according to him, she was in the wrong church, and since she wouldn't join his church, then he had to break it off. To the weeping bride's credit, her parents did pay back everyone, including my wife, the money for her bridesmaid dress. My buddy was engaged to be married. Everything was going great up until about 2 months before the wedding, when the bride freaked out about something very minor during a family vacation and stopped speaking to him. They would text once a day so the other knew they were okay. They would say "I love you," and she would assure him she still wanted to get married. 1 month before the wedding, she called it off. They still hadn't talked except for the texts. So he called all his people and told them the wedding was off. Only he forgot about one of his friends who had been on his fiance's list, as he was a mutual friend. Mutual friend still went to the wedding, where he found a wedding. The woman had been seeing someone on the side. Still went through with the wedding, but to a different guy. All on my friend's dime. He had left her in charge on cancelling everything. I was the DJ. "Please take your gifts home with you when you leave," was the weirdest announcements I've ever made. Of the 80+ I've done, it's definitely the weirdest. The ceremony walking down the aisle music just kept looping and looping until the parents walked up and announced the couple was postponing things, which was code for "damn, I really hope they work this shit out. Because if they don't, that's a lot of money down the drain." They never worked it out. The bride and groom never showed their faces for the entirety of the day. Both sets of parents were crying on and off. Bridesmaids and groomsmen had changed out of their wedding attire. I was forced to make announcements like the buffet has now opened. Yes, they are serving the food and there will be no ceremonial cutting of the cake. So, feel free to grab some. And -X200B. I was furiously texting my friends like /what the hell do I play at a cancelled wedding /. I got replies like "we are never getting back together," and frankly most of Swift's catalog. Instead, I just played jazz and Daft Punk. Seemed to fit somehow. And -X200B. There was a complete 6-piece Katy Perry cover band that was a surprise to the bride. They just packed up and left without playing anything. No, there wasn't a dance party. Can you imagine? In a hoe. I only took half of my original payment because they were friends of mine. The best part is, through a game of telephone with the maid of honor, I had to get the mother of the bride to write the check for me, and she wrote my name as Russ Brook. My name's not Russ Brook, and it's nowhere near that. It starts with Ross and ends with a famous German beer that rhymes with heck. The check cashed anyways. Crazy. Not entirely on message, but we almost called off our wedding the day before. Her dad had a massive heart attack and almost died 2 days beforehand. He had surgery, died 2 or 3 times during it. We got like 7 hours of sleep over 2 nights. 3 days. He was in the ICU up until the ceremony. He then showed up and walked her down the aisle with an automatic defibrillator vest, then sat in a wheelchair, thank God. My emotions were all over the place. I don't know how she kept it together, lol. Not quite at the altar, but a few weeks before the wedding I left my fiance. We had been together 4 years and the proposal was really half-assed. Like he was asking because we had been together so long, and it seemed the next thing to do. Not because he actually was excited about marrying me. I had been unhappy with him for a long time, but his emotional abuse had convinced me that this was the best relationship I was ever going to find, so I stayed. My mom came to visit a month before the wedding and saw how miserable I was. She said, "You don't have to marry him if it won't make you happy." It was such a simple thing to say, but it was like someone finally gave me permission to consider my own feelings for the first time in years, and it changed my whole perspective. I called it off, moved out, got some agency over my own life, and am now living happily ever after. Edit. I realized I forgot to include the fallout op asked for. Lost money on deposits. Managed to sell the dress for half of what I'd paid. Left all the high ticket items I had purchased during the relationship behind. To avoid staying any longer to fight with him, I'd pay it all 10 times over to again feel the immediate relief I felt when I left our house for the last time. And I'd pay it 1000 times over to keep the life I have now without him. I just found out my mom called off her wedding pretty late in the process. This was in the 1960s and the formal wedding announcement with photos had already been posted in the newspaper. Because that was a thing that people used to do. IG. Close bracket. She and her fiancé, who I'll call her Virgo, had met in college, gotten pregnant, and gave the baby up for adoption. They then continued to date for another 3 years, got engaged when my mom was 21, and called off the wedding a month before the ceremony. Turns out that giving a baby up in college is a really bonding experience and all your friends will be like, I cannot believe you guys survived that together. Y'all such a great couple. Y'all such role models. etc. when in actuality y'all are in freaking college and are just figuring out who you are as people. And maybe that means that y'all are not meant to be together. She says that everyone just assumed they would get married, so they were going to wherever, course where else do they go from? The adoption? Luckily they realized they were just going along with the motions in time. My mom says it was no hard feelings between her and Steve. That they meet up every 35 years just to see what turns up with the other, and she has no regrets, unlike her actual marriage to my father. But hey, she got me out of that deal, so it was not at all bad. Meanwhile, I just found out / met my 54-year-old sibling for the first time that I had not known about. My mom's not sick, but she is getting older, and I guess she felt she needed to get this off her chest and tell me before it was too late. Turns out my secret sister is a fucking CrossFit trainer with arms like cannons, so I have no genetic excuse for not being able to do a pull-up. Also, my mom is cool as shit and I think this whole story makes her even cooler. Not quite at the altar, but an ex-girlfriend was at a bachelorette party at a seedy male strip club. She came home from the party and said, well, the wedding is off. She said the bride was getting the usual treatment, sitting in a chair with strippers gyrating around her, whipping dongs around, and then one put whipped cream on his cock and invited her to lick it off, which she did, with her tonsils, until the stripper shoots his load all over the front of her "I'm the bride" shirt. About this moment, the bride kind of comes to her senses, looks around and sees like 20 of her friends pointing cell phones at her, recording and taking photos, and starts freaking out. My girlfriend says she started screaming at everyone, "You better delete that shit," and generally having a full rage meltdown, which is apparently tough to take seriously when you're based in stripages. This tale of modern romance closes very shortly later with the bride's phone ringing a call from her fiancé, who has already received photos from her friends of his bride to be with a cock stuffed in her mouth. I didn't leave her at the altar. Exactly. But I refused to sign the marriage certificate and complete the process. My ex, I'll call her Karen, was on multiple psych meds for her issues and was really cool, but stopped taking them cold turkey a few months after we were official. The main issue that caused our issues was her crippling body dysmorphia and her psychopathy. Both were diagnoses she got from counselors, not just buzzwords she used to describe how cookie she was. There is a massive history I've learned with her, and I could go on, but I'll stay focused. It started as her asking me to avoid movies with nude scenes because it upset her. I agreed. Then it was anything racy. Then it was anything with women at all. Then it was animated women. She came into a room I was playing Fallout 3 in and knocked my TV to the ground because she found out I was playing a female character. And unmodded characters looked like anthropomorphic potatoes. So she was just mad that I was playing a girl. Another time I was driving and she saw a girl in a bikini top and covered my eyes as I was passing through an intersection. She clawed me in the neck. I still have scars there because I told her I wasn't going to break my DVDs in half to prove I loved her, since they had women in them and I should want to break them. I wasn't allowed to leave the house alone because I might see a girl and cheat on her. I went to Walmart alone once and ended up having to apologize loudly and beg her to unlock the front door so I could get inside. Incident after incident. Why did I stay? I had an abusive mother and father growing up, so I think that I was already programmed to just deal with abuse. My first girlfriend was a manipulator and ended up stealing a ton of money from me. I had proof but didn't do anything. Telling myself, welp, lesson learned. I was just used for a long time, so when Karen came along it was comfortable to be miserable. She decided we should get married and I reluctantly agreed. The day came. We did the ceremony. But after I had my first moment of clarity, I refused to sign the marriage certificate to make it official until she started getting counseling. She refused. She said that all a counselor would do was tell her she needed to work on herself. But she wasn't the problem. Everyone else was. She continued grinding at me and my sanity. I lost my job and for 8 months I sat at home, playing World of Warcraft all day, eating delivery, and getting unemployment because she didn't want me at a job because I might meet a girl and cheat on her. But of course she wouldn't work. I ended up at a new place and it was World War III with her when she discovered that other girls worked there with me. I stood strong for keeping the job. At least, it was just years of mental and physical abuse. Finally, the time came. I discovered she was cheating on me. She would hide her phone from me, never let me see it, panic if I was near it. She left it at home by accident and I read her texts. I blamed myself. I talked to her. Everything was going to get better because she did something so bad. Then I caught her again with the same guy. I discovered this because I put a keylogger on my computer and went into her Facebook to see her bashing me with the guy and talking about his dick. She was incredibly hateful with me all the time, accusing me of looking at other girls, accusing me of trying to cheat, telling me over and over how she was never going to cheat, and then making fun of me and getting fucked by another dude. That is when I suddenly grew a spine. Everything clicked for me. I opened a new bank account. I put my tax return into it and moved my military disability check and my paycheck to direct deposit into that account. I left a couple hundred in our joint account to keep it open. After a month and a half I had 11 grand saved up. I waited until she went out with her friend for the day and I went and got an apartment and just quietly moved on her. She got home and flipped out. She screamed and threatened and cried and tried to guilt me. But I was done. I was free. Or so I thought. Fast forward 2 years and counseling for myself. I met a wonderful woman. I wanted to marry her. The day I was going to propose, guess who sent me an email? Karen. She, in her weirdly childish way of communicating, lets me know that she wants a divorce so she can marry the next sucker she roped in. I was like, yeah. We weren't married. Remember? I didn't sign anything. She said that I may not have. But we were married. What? See? Karen had a friend. I'll call Brian. Brian and I looked very similar. Like we could be related. Brian was in love with Karen and would do anything she asked. A week after I said I wasn't signing anything, my wallet disappeared for a couple days. I was somewhat absent-minded, so I assumed I misplaced it. It turned up, and I forgot about losing it. What Karen did was take it and have Brian pose as me at the courthouse. He forged my signature using my information. We were married this whole time. I called a lawyer and asked what I could do, but there was nothing that could be done because there was no proof that it had happened. Yeah, she admitted it, but she could also just say she was messing with me and deny the whole thing. Brian had moved states, and I had no idea where he was. Not that he would admit to it. I had no recourse. I was already ready to marry my new fiance, but Karen, after 3 years, wanted to try and reconcile as friends. I said no. During this time her new dude found out about it and bailed. So she submitted divorce papers, but stated I wasn't responding. So I couldn't do anything. So I was stuck with her dragging her feet for almost a year, making threats and demands. I finally invited her out to lunch to catch up, but instead dragged her ass into a legal assistance place. She was a coward at heart and didn't know how to deal with my being forceful, so she was cowed into signing all the documents and agreeing to having them submitted on her behalf by the legal assistant. 2 weeks later we were divorced, and she still has the gall to blame me for everything because I made her go through with the divorce instead of going to